Speak. Prosody rate equals 90%. Can you imagine a king capable of blinding 1,000 soldiers? The story of Samuel de Bulgaria and his brutal punishment will leave you breathless. Discover the truth behind this dark and bloody legend. Subscribe and activate the bell so as not to miss anything. I talk about Samuel, a Bulgarian king of the 10th century, a character wrapped in legends as dark as fascinating. Its history is not reduced to battles and conquests. It is a woven tapestry with threads of power, religion, and, above all, mystery. What is behind Samuel's figure? A pious monarch or a ruthless tyrant? The legend that I will tell you today will make you question everything. Many remember him for his courage, for the reconquest of lost territories before the Byzantine Empire. But cruel acts are also attributed, decisions that even today continue to generate debate. The story is sometimes written with blood ink and shadows, and Samuel's is full of both. The enigma around Samuel feeds on the shortage of reliable primary sources. The chronicles of the time are often contradictory, leaving a wide margin for interpretation, for speculation. What is true and what is legend in the history of this enigmatic king? Imagine the 10th century. Bulgaria, a vibrant but also unstable kingdom, extended by the Balkans to the north, the powerful Magyars pressed their borders, threatening with constant incursions to the west, the Byzantine Empire, with its enormous military power and its complex diplomacy, was a neighbor at the same time ally and rival. Samuel, in the midst of all this, had to deal with the complex geopolitics of his time. The Byzantine Empire, with its capital in Constantinople, was a dominant force. His imperial ambitions constantly collided with those of Bulgaria. Think of fragile alliances, in unexpected betrayals, in the constant need to maintain the balance of power to avoid a large-scale war. The constant threat of Byzantine expansion was a reality that Samuel knew very well. Beyond the Byzantine Empire, the Magyars, a nomadic people of Asian origin, represented another threat. His rapid incursions, their ability to mobilize quickly, constantly tested the Bulgarian defenses. Samuel had to deploy his armies to defend northern borders, spending vital resources and political energy to keep these formidable warriors at bay. But let's go back to the 10th century. In the midst of that instability, a key character emerges. Samuel. His rise to power was not easy. Coming from a noble family, but not the most powerful, Samuel made his way through intrigue and war. Imagine the battles, broken alliances, betrayals, everything to reach the top. Once on the throne, Samuel proposed an ambitious goal: rebuild and expand the Bulgarian kingdom. After the fall of the First Bulgaria, the empire was in ruins, divided by wars and invasions. Samuel saw the opportunity to restore his past glory. For you, what does it mean to rebuild an empire in ruins? His reign was marked by continuous wars against the Byzantine Empire, his main rival. Samuel not only dreamed of recovering lost territories, but also to create a bigger and more powerful Bulgarian empire than ever. He wanted to leave an indelible brand in history, a legend that transcended generations. His ambitions were as vast as the territories that he longed to conquer. He did not settle for simple survival. He wanted domination. For Samuel, there was no easy path to greatness, just a constant struggle against powerful enemies and the need to forge his own destiny. Do you think Samuel achieved his goal? His ascent coincided with the growing threat of the Byzantine Empire, a giant thirst to recover lost territories. Imagine the tension. Two empires, both powerful, both with claims on the same fertile lands of the Balkans. For you, the young Bulgaria, was a struggle for survival, a constant dance between diplomacy and war. The Byzantine Empire, with its disciplined army and its technological superiority, represented a constant threat. Think about fear, the uncertainty that the population should feel in the face of the rumor of a new Byzantine incursion. Every Samuel's victory was a small light of hope in the midst of darkness. But Samuel was not a man who was easily intimidated. His cunning and his military ability allowed him to face the powerful enemy, getting victories that surprised their own and strangers. Remember that each battle was a risky bet, a struggle for the survival of its people. The tensions between both empires were palpable, a constant struggle for power and influence in the Balkans. For you, it is easy to understand that this conflict was not only a war for territories, but a struggle for the identity and sovereignty of Bulgaria. Prosody, /speak. Speak. Prosody rate equals 90%. But let's go back to Samuel. The tension between Bulgaria and Byzantium was palpable, a constant war that left behind a trace of death and destruction. You could imagine the bell battles, the shock of swords and the roar of the armies. Think of the devastation that they left in their path: llamas villages, raised fields, hunger and disease stalking the survivors. The consequences of these wars were not limited to the battlefield. The population suffered greatly. Imagine the impact on the economy. Lost harvests, interrupted trade, the shortage of basic resources. Diseases such as plague quickly extended among civilians, further weakening to the kingdom. The families separated, the homes were destroyed, and the culture was threatened. Think about the loss of human lives, the psychological impact of constant war. Political instability was another direct consequence, with internal rebellions and struggles further weakening the Bulgarian state, creating a culture broth for distrust and fear. Imagine the Battle of Clydian, year 1014. The Byzantine army, led by Basilio II, was surrounded. Samuel, the Bulgarian Tsar, trusted the victory. His troops, fierce and numerous, had cornered the enemy. The victory seemed safe, a triumph that would seal its legacy forever. But war, as you know, rarely behaves as we expect. The Byzantines, although surpassed in number, resisted an unexpected ferocity. The battle was bloody and brutal, a butcher shop where death hovered over each warrior. Despite their apparent superiority, Bulgarian troops began to falter. The Byzantine resistance became harder, and the victory that seemed so close slowly vanished. Finally, the Byzantine army made its way, breaking the Bulgarian lines. Samuel, seeing the imminent defeat, ordered the withdrawal. But the victory, so sweet at the beginning, became a bitter tragedy. The escape was transformed into a massacre, with thousands of Bulgarian soldiers falling under the enemy's swords. And this is where history becomes really terrible. Basilio II, in his cruelty, ordered to blind 15,000 Bulgarian prisoners. Only 100 of every 100 men retained one eye to guide their blind companions back to Bulgaria. A horrible image, right? A military triumph that became an atrocity, a Pyrrhic victory that would forever mark the history of Bulgaria. But the victory became ash in the mouth. Surrounded, defeated, Samuel, the powerful Tsar, was taken prisoner. Imagine humiliation. Emperor Basilio II, impassive, before his defeated enemy, he was no longer the invincible leader, the king who had challenged the Byzantine Empire for years. Now, he was just an old, vulnerable man, at the mercy of his implacable rival. Military defeat was only the beginning of his suffering. Basilio II, in an act of calculated cruelty, ordered terrible punishment. Remember that image. Samuel's eyes, full of the bitterness of defeat, looked towards an uncertain future. Humiliation was not only physical, but a deep wound in its pride and in its soul. The psychological impact was devastating. Think about the weight of his lost empire, of his broken dreams, of the betrayal of fortune. The image of his blind soldiers, a symbol of his defeat, became a recurrent nightmare. The humiliation was recorded in his mind, a constant torment that accompanied him until the end of his days. Samuel's humiliation did not end there. Basilio II, a man known for his calculated cruelty, had a plan to mark his enemy forever. You imagine the scene. Hundreds of Bulgarian soldiers, Samuel's eyes stuck in his own, waiting for the verdict of the Byzantine emperor, a decision that would change the story, a decision that would be debated between reality and legend for centuries. Legend tells that Basilio II ordered to blind 1,000 Bulgarian soldiers. A brutal act, a symbol of power and a warning to any rebel future. But did it really happen? Historians discuss whether it was a real punishment or an exaggeration to feed the imperial propaganda. Perhaps, the figure of 1,000 soldiers is a metaphor for the disastrous result of the Bulgarian rebellion. Be true or legend, the history of the blindness of 1,000 soldiers was recorded in the collective memory. It became a symbol of ruthless power of the Byzantine Empire and the humiliation suffered by the Bulgarian people. Imagine the impact of that image. A private army of sight, an image that endures in time as a testimony of extreme brutality. But how true this story is? You will wonder if such a massacre really happened. The truth is that historical sources are, like everything in history, a bit ambiguous. We have Byzantine chronicles, of course, that describe Basil's victory and Samuel's humiliation. But these chronicles, written from the perspective of the winner, can be partial, exaggerating the magnitude of Bulgarian defeat to glorify its emperor. prosody, speak. Speak, prosody rate equals 90%. There are other sources, less direct, that give us clues. Subsequent texts, writing centuries later, mention the event, but often with variations. Some talk about hundreds of blinded soldiers, others of thousands. These discrepancies make us doubt. Was it a propaganda exaggeration to demoralize the enemy? Or the collective memory exaggerated the number of victims over time? The lack of contemporary Bulgarian sources to the event further complicates the reconstruction of the facts. Imagine how difficult it would be to obtain an objective version of the story if we only had the victors' stories. Therefore, the history of blindness of Bulgarian soldiers remains a mystery, an enigma wrapped in the fog of history with more questions than answers. But what does blindness mean in this context? It is not just a physical cruelty, but a powerful symbol. Think of blindness as the loss of vision, but also as the loss of the divine guide, the inability to see truth or justice. For some interpretations, it represents the loss of understanding, blind submission to a tyrannical leader, or the inability to discern between good and evil. In other versions, the blindness of the soldiers could be a metaphor of divine punishment. Samuel, a powerful king but perhaps ruthless, could have incurred the wrath of God. His punishment, the blindness of his army, would be a visible manifestation of divine anger, a reminder of the fragility of earthly power against the superior force. Perhaps blindness is not literal, but an allegorical representation. Imagine an army that, although physically intact, has become unable to discern the right path, blinded by ambition, corruption, or blind loyalty to a wrong leader. It would be a moral blindness, a loss of discernment that leads to ruin. Imagine the impact: thousands of soldiers suddenly useless for war. The Bulgarian military force weakened at once. Think of logistics. Feed, dress, and care for so many blind men represented a huge burden for the kingdom. Resources that were no longer available to other crucial areas, such as defense or construction. The economy of the kingdom resented. The loss of soldiers meant a lower tax collection capacity, since many peasants, formerly warriors, could no longer contribute. The political consequences were immediate. The king's authority was questioned not only for its cruelty, but also for its ineffectiveness in the management of resources and the defense of the kingdom. The army's morale suffered a hard blow. The brutality of punishment sowed fear and distrust between troops. Who could trust a leader capable of such an atrocity? The effectiveness of future military campaigns was compromised, since fear of blindness could paralyze soldiers during combat. Imagine how this event was represented at the time. Are there paintings or icons that show Samuel, perhaps imposing their punishment? We may not find direct representations of mass blindness, but we can seek indications in the art of the Bulgarian century. Think of the details. Are battles with incapacitated soldiers represent? Is there any allegory that suggests the loss of military force? The search for these clues is crucial to understand how this event was historically perceived. The religious iconography of the time could offer indirect keys. Remember that Christianity was the dominant religion. Did images of blindness or darkness be used to symbolize some kind of divine punishment or the fragility of earthly power? Analyze the symbology of the Bulgarian works of art of the time. Even those that do not refer direct to the event can reveal valuable information. Look for patterns, symbols, and representations that can refer to the blindness of the soldiers. Of course, the historical interpretation of these artistic representations is fundamental. We cannot assume that each image has a direct connection with Samuel's punishment. A careful analysis is necessary, considering the historical context, the artistic conventions of the time, and the possible influence of propaganda or the subsequent interpretation of the facts. Remember that history is also built through the interpretation of art. But who really Samuel for you? A hero who consolidated the First Bulgarian Empire, expanding its borders and facing powerful enemies such as the Byzantine Empire. Its military victories, their ability to organize an army, and its indisputable leadership are indisputable historical facts. The chronicles of the time paint him as a charismatic leader, capable of inspiring loyalty and courage in his troops. Prosody, speak. Speak, prosody rate equals 90%, however. The image of the hero is contrasted by the accusations of cruelty and brutality. The blindness of Byzantine soldiers is only an example of their severity, an act that, although effective from a strategic point of view, reveals a dark facet of their personality. For you, does the media justify in this case? Or will the story judge Samuel more for his methods than for his achievements? Its legacy is still the object of debate today. Some consider it a great ruler, a builder of empires, a defender of Bulgarian culture. Others, on the other hand, see it as a ruthless tyrant responsible for innumerable sufferings. The truth is probably at an intermediate point, a complex mixture of successes and errors, glories and atrocities that define the figure of a complex leader. But what do the Byzantine chronicles say? They naturally paint a very different picture. For them, Samuel was not a hero, but a barbarian, a usurper who dared to challenge the legitimate power of the empire. Imagine his stories. A wild Bulgarian army, led by an ambitious tyrant, threatening the civilization and the established order. Note how reality is distorted through your eyes. Their descriptions of the battles are full of exaggerations, minimizing the Bulgarian victories and magnifying their own. Think of inherent bias. The victors write the story, and for Byzantium, Samuel was a formidable enemy that should be demonized to justify their defeats and maintain the image of imperial superiority. The contradictions are evident when comparing the Byzantine sources with others, such as the scarce Bulgarian chronicles that survived. While Byzantium highlights Samuel's cruelty, these other sources paint a more complex panorama, showing a capable leader, even if he was ruthless in the war. Who tells you the complete truth? The answer, as is usually the case, is probably something in the middle. But let's go back to Clydian. For you, that battle was not just a massacre, it was a turning point. Imagine the impact. The Byzantine army, until then invincible, defeated. Emperor Basilio II humiliated. Suddenly, the power in the Balkans had changed hands. The First Bulgarian Empire, under the command of Samuel, had become a dominant force. For centuries, Byzantium had dominated the region, imposing its will. Now, the balance leaned. Samuel had not only won a battle. He had won a psychological war. Fear had taken over the empire, and the reputation of invincibility of the Byzantines had shattered. You could understand the terror that caused in the hearts of the emperors. This change of power was not just a military issue, it was a blow to the prestige of Byzantium, which extended beyond the battlefields. The political control of the region was shaken to its foundations. Alliances broke, territories changed hands, and a new reality won the Balkans. Samuel's victory opened a new chapter in history, one where Bulgaria stood as a regional power. But imagine life after Clydian, for a simple Bulgarian villager. You working the land with rudimentary tools under a relentless sun. Your hands, tanned for constant work, scratching the hard land to obtain daily sustenance. The harvest, the hope of a year without hunger, an uncertain future under the immense sky of Bulgaria. Your family, around a fire, sharing a simple bread and vegetable meal. The stories of your ancestors, transmitted from generation to generation, unite you to the history of your people. The night, dark and full of stars, a mantle that covers the stillness of the village, while the sound of the crickets accompanies your dreams. Trade, a slow and small-scale exchange. The artisans, working with their hands, creating objects with wood, metal, or cloth. Their skills, inherited from generation to generation, shape everyday life. The church, center of the community, where faith offers you comfort and hope in difficult times. War, a constant reality. Although Clydian's battle was fought far away, its consequences extended throughout the country, affecting each of its corners. The possibility of being called to Rose, of leaving your home and your family, always present in your mind, a shadow that darkened your daily life. But returning to your life, can you imagine the strength of the Bulgarian army? They were not just peasants with spears. There was a hierarchical organization with combs and strategos in command, commanding light and heavy cavalry units, in addition to the fearsome infantry. They were experts in ambush tactics and guerrilla war, taking advantage of the mountain land of their homeland. Prosody, or speak. Speak, prosody rate equals 90%. His weapons were lethal curved swords, perfect for cutting and tear, long spears to keep the enemy at bay, and compound arches that launched arrows with deadly precision at large distances. The cavalry, fast and agile, was key to its flanks and persecution tactics, while the infantry, disciplined and well-trained, formed impenetrable defense lines. Think about the power of such an army, capable of facing much more numerous armies. His knowledge of the terrain, his skill with weapons and his strong discipline, turned Bulgarian soldiers into a fearsome force capable of resisting and prevailing in the most bloody battles. An army that, as you will see, played a crucial role in the history of your country. But the Bulgarian army, however powerful, faced a giant. We talk about the Byzantine Empire, with its incomparable war machine. Imagine the difference. You, with your loyal soldiers, against an army that surpassed you in an overwhelming number. It was not a fair fight, not even a battle. It was an unstoppable avalanche. The Byzantines, with their experience in large-scale military campaigns, could mobilize entire legions. While you had a few thousand, they had tens of thousands, even hundreds of thousands of soldiers. That numerical difference was a decisive factor, a dark shadow about your victory possibilities. Think of logistics. Feeding, equipping, and maintaining such a great force was a monumental challenge for you, but for the Byzantine Empire, it was a task they had been doing for centuries. Its numerical superiority was not only a matter of brute force but also of organization and resources. But before talking about Samuel's punishment, we must understand the context. You, as a spectator, need to know that the Bulgarian of the 10th century was deeply religious. Christianity, just adopted, was not only a belief, but the glue that united society. It influenced everything from politics to everyday life. Imagine the deep faith of Bulgarian soldiers, the certainty that God was on his side in battle. Christianity was not a passive religion. It was a political engine. The Tsar, as the maximum representative of God on earth, based his legitimacy on faith. His power, his right to govern, was connected directly to the church. The icons and relics were symbols of power, and closely controlled the church to reinforce its authority. Think of how this connection between religion and power molded. The church, meanwhile, had great social power. He acted as an education, charity, and justice center. The monasteries were learning centers, preserving culture and literature. The priests were influential figures in the communities, offering spiritual and social orientation. Keep in mind that this religious structure directly influenced the morals and behavior of Bulgarian soldiers. But let's go back to Samuel. His reign was not only characterized by war, but also by a cultural flowering that, although eclipsed by conflicts, left a fascinating legacy. Imagine the enlightened manuscripts, those precious books with their golden letters and vibrant images of saints and biblical scenes. They were a reflection of the faith and art of the time, a way of preserving history and Bulgarian culture. Think of music, probably played with instruments such as flute, lute, or dulcimer. Music that accompanied religious ceremonies, popular festivities, or even the songs of the troubadours that crossed the kingdom telling stories and legends. Music that, although we cannot hear it directly, resonates in the descriptions of the time and in the influence it had in the music of the later centuries. And the architecture, can you imagine the churches and palaces of the time? Imposing buildings with their domes and frescoes, which combined Byzantine and local influences. They were spaces not only of cult or power, but also of art, with mosaics and paintings that told stories, represented religious figures, and reflected Bulgaria's cultural wealth at that time. A legacy that, despite the passage of time, still endures. But how did the Bulgarian Empire really work under Samuel? His power focused on himself as emperor, but had a complex network of nobles and officials. Imagine a hierarchical system, with it on the cusp, surrounded by boyards, powerful landowners who controlled vast extensions of earth and exercised great regional power. These were not mere vassals, but allies with their own interests, whom Samuel had to keep happy to ensure the stability of the kingdom. Prosody, speak. Speak. Prosody rate equals 90%. Under the boyardos, there were military and administrative officers, responsible for governing the provinces and raising taxes. Think about the importance of loyalty and efficiency in this system. Samuel depended on the obedience of these men to maintain control over their vast empire, and any failure in the chain of command could have devastating consequences. A system that, although complex, worked with a well-defined hierarchical structure. The Bulgarian Orthodox Church also played a crucial role, not only in spiritual life, but also in politics. The bishops and the patriarch were influential figures, with the power to influence public opinion and the decisions of the emperor himself. Samuel understood this power and used it to consolidate his authority and legitimize his reign. Imagine palatial intrigues and religious influence, inseparable elements of power in medieval Bulgaria. But how was Samuel's system with the Byzantine Empire, its great rival? The Byzantine Empire, with its long tradition, had a much more complex and centralized political structure. In Byzantium, the emperor was not only the head of the army and government, but also the head of the church, an almost divine figure with absolute power. Unlike the Bulgarian system, where the influence of the nobility was more palpable, in Byzantium there was an extensive and highly hierarchical bureaucracy. Imperial officials, carefully selected, were responsible for managing the different provinces and collecting taxes. This system, although efficient, could also be susceptible to corruption and palatial intrigues. The Byzantine army, unlike the Bulgarian army, which depended largely on personal loyalty to Samuel, was a professional and much larger force with a formalized military structure. There were different ranges and military hierarchies, with highly trained generals and officers. This professional military organization gave them a significant advantage in wars against the Bulgarians. But let's go back to Samuel. His Bulgaria, despite his military power, had an economy based primarily on agriculture. Imagine extensive wheat, barley and millet fields, cultivated by peasants who worked the land with wood plows lying. Livestock was also crucial, providing meat, milk and skins. You could see shepherds driving flocks of sheep and goats through the hills, a landscape that defined the daily life of many. Trade, although less developed than in the Byzantine Empire, played an important role. Think of caravans of merchants that crossed the commercial routes, carrying local products such as honey, bee wax, and wool to nearby cities and markets. The exchange of goods was vital for the Bulgarian economy, although probably more limited than in the richest centers of the empire. Natural resources also contributed to the economy. The wood of the forests served to build houses, ships and tools. Minerals, although exploited on a smaller scale than in other regions, provided metals for the elaboration of weapons and tools. Remember that Bulgaria's wealth at that time was closely linked to the productivity of his land and the work of his people. But how was the Bulgarian economy with that of the Byzantine Empire, its powerful neighbor? While you saw crop fields in Bulgaria, imagine the overflowing wealth of Constantinople. The Byzantine Empire, with its control over crucial trade routes, had access to spices, silks and other luxury goods that generated huge income. His currency, the hyperpyro, was coveted throughout the Mediterranean, which gave him an immense economic advantage over Bulgaria. Its economy was based not only on trade, but also on a sophisticated tax administration and an efficient tax collection network. While the Bulgarian peasants delivered a part of their harvest, the Byzantine Empire had a much more complex system that allowed a greater accumulation of wealth in the imperial coffers. Think of taxes on land, trade, and artisanal production, all meticulously organized to maintain imperial machinery in operation. This economic difference translated into a superior military power. The Byzantine Empire could afford a much larger and better equipped army than Samuel's. While Bulgarian soldiers depended largely on agriculture for subsistence, Byzantine soldiers received a regular salary and had better quality armament and equipment. This economic superiority was directly reflected on the battlefield, giving Byzantium a decisive advantage in conflicts. Prosody, speak. Speak. Prosody rate equals 90%. But returning to Bulgaria, imagines his society. A complex pyramid with the Tsar on top, the absolute ruler. Below, the nobility, the boyardos, powerful landowners who controlled vast extensions of land and exerted a considerable influence on the people. It was they who advised the Tsar and directed the military campaigns. Their lives were a mixture of luxury and power, but also of intrigues and struggles for the real favor. Then came the peasants, the bulk of the population. Most were farmers who worked the land, often in hard conditions. His life revolved around agriculture, with few chances of ascending socially. They were the workforce of the kingdom, producing the food and resources that society maintained, but with little or no legal protection. Below the peasants, there were artisans who produced manufactured goods such as tools, weapons, and textiles. Although with greater skill than the peasants, they still lived in a vulnerable social position, dependent on the favor of the nobility or the market. Some artisans, particularly the most skilled, could accumulate some wealth, but their social status remained relatively low. Finally, at the base of the pyramid, were the slaves, who had no right and were at the mercy of their masters. His situation was the worst imaginable, with a life marked by forced labor and lack of freedom. Although his number was less than in other contemporary societies, his presence was a reminder of the rigid social hierarchy of medieval Bulgaria. But how was Bulgarian society with that of the Byzantine Empire, its powerful neighbor? Imagine Constantinople, a dazzling city, center of a rich and sophisticated empire. There, the emperor, a Basilius, ruled with an almost divine power, surrounded by a complex and hierarchical court. The Byzantine nobility, with its palatial intrigues and its vast properties, was very different from that of Bulgaria, although both shared the control of the land and the peasantry. While in Bulgaria the power of the Tsar was based on a more feudal structure, the Byzantine emperor relied on a complex bureaucracy, a network of officials and military who maintained control over a vast territory. Think about the difference. A more personalized system versus one more institutionalized. The Orthodox Church played a crucial role in both empires, but its influence on daily life and politics was even more penetrating Byzantium. Trade and wealth flourished in Constantinople, attracting merchants from all over the known world. This prosperity contrasted with the most rural and agrarian economy in Bulgaria, although the latter also had its commercial routes and urban centers. In summary, while Bulgaria was characterized by a more feudal and rural society, Byzantium represented an urban, sophisticated and centralized empire with a powerful bureaucracy and a more dynamic economy. But what's true in Samuel's story? The Byzantine chronicles, written from the perspective of the enemy, paint Samuel as a cruel tyrant. They speak of their ruthless conquest and their relentless revenge. However, Bulgarian sources, although scarce, have a different, more nuanced image. The truth, as is usually the case, is probably at some intermediate point. The lack of contemporary Bulgarian sources hinders the objective reconstruction of the facts. Many of the narratives we know come to us through intermediaries, filtered by prejudices and political agendas. Analyzing these sources with a critical eye is essential to separate the legend from reality. You should keep in mind that each chronicle has its own perspective and bias. Think about the blindness of the 1,000 soldiers. Was it an act of barbarism, as painted by Byzantine chronicles, or a calculated military strategy? Perhaps, the truth is at an intermediate point, in a mixture of cruelty and pragmatism. Perhaps, the exaggeration in the numbers is a way to emphasize the power of Samuel and the terror that inspired his enemies. The interpretation of the facts depends on the source you consult and your own perspective. But how to interpret those chronicles? Remember that historical sources, especially those written by the victors, often distort reality. The Byzantine Empire, the enemy of Samuel, had all the interest in presenting it as a monster, a tyrant capable of any atrocity. Thus, their actions were magnified, their motivations were misrepresented, and their image became a symbol of evil necessary to justify the Byzantine conquests. Propaganda is a powerful weapon, right? In the time of Samuel, the information did not circulate as today. The official version, that of the Byzantine Empire, was the one that reached more ears. This created a narrative that lasts through the centuries, influencing how Samuel is perceived even today. Think about the impact of information control on the construction of history. /prosody, /speak. Speak, prosody rate equals 90%. The influence of power is key to understanding historical manipulation. The powerful, whether emperors or religious leaders, have the means to control the narrative. They can censor information, promote favorable versions, and silence dissident voices. In the case of Samuel, the Byzantine version was imposed, eclipsing other perspectives, possibly more fair or nuanced, that could exist. But Samuel's story did not stay in the Byzantine chronicles. It became a legend. A story transmitted from generation to generation, modified and amplified over time. Think about how history transforms into mouth-to-mouth, how details are added, the consequences are exaggerated, until reality melts with fiction. Imagine the villagers, centuries later, telling the story around the fire, adding macabre details to the blindness of the soldiers, turning Samuel into an almost mythical character, a vengeful and powerful king, capable of inflicting divine punishments. Legend became a warning, an example of the consequences of disobedience or betrayal. Thus, Samuel's story transcended his time. It became part of the Bulgarian folklore, a story that adapts and transforms according to the time and context. Its impact extends to this day, not only as a historical fact debated, but as a myth, a legend that lasts in collective memory. Think about what I told you, thousands of blinded soldiers. How did it happen? The official version speaks of Samuel's revenge, but what if there are other explanations? A hypothesis points to an infectious disease, perhaps an extremely virulent epidemic conjunctivitis, capable of causing temporary or permanent blindness. At that time, lack of hygiene and precarious living conditions in military camps could have favored the rapid spread of a pathogen. Another theory suggests an attack with rudimentary chemical weapons. Imagine an irritating substance, perhaps based on toxic herbs or lime, launched by the Bulgarians or even accidentally. Prolonged exposure to such substance could have caused extreme irritation, leading to temporary or even permanent blindness, depending on the concentration and duration of the contact. Let's not forget that medieval war was brutal and unorthodox. Finally, we cannot rule out the possibility of a deliberate exaggeration in the Byzantine chronicles. Remember that these chronicles often served for political purposes, and magnifying the defeat of the enemy army could be a way to increase the prestige of the empire. The figure of 1,000 blind soldiers could be a simplification or even an invention, a way of highlighting the magnitude of the Byzantine victory and the cruelty of the enemy. But let's go back to the blindness of those thousands of soldiers. What would happen if, instead of a military disease or ploy, the explanation resided in the faith? For the people of the time, divine intervention was a common explanation for inexplicable events. Think about it. An entire army, deprived of the view, a devastating blow that could be interpreted as a divine punishment for some transgression, real or perceived. Imagine the religious perspective of the time. For many, military victory was not only a matter of strategy and strength, but also of the divine blessing. That a defeat as overwhelming as massive blindness could be seen as a clear sign of the wrath of God, a punishment for pride, cruelty, or lack of piety on the battlefield. Faith played a crucial role in the lives of these people, shaping their understanding of the world and the events that happened. Perhaps, from this perspective, blindness was not only a tragedy, but also a lesson, a reminder of the superior power and the need for humility before the divine will. To understand Samuel's story, we have to try to see the world through the eyes of those who lived it, considering the deep influence of religion in its interpretation of events. Was it a divine punishment? That is a question that only you can answer after analyzing all the possibilities. Imagine, for a moment, that blindness was not a divine miracle, but the consequence of human action. Think about the logistics of an army. Planning, supply, hygiene. An error in any of these aspects, in an era without the modern understanding of diseases, could have caused an epidemic. What if blindness was the result of massive food poisoning? Perhaps the king, in his arrogance, ignored the warnings about the quality of the food. Or think about the possibility of sabotage. Perhaps an enemy, knowing the vulnerability of the army, contaminated water or food sources. A subtle, almost imperceptible action at the time, which triggered a terrible consequence. The blindness, then, would be the result of a primitive chemical war, an act of silent and devastating war. Prosody, speak. Prosody rate equals 90%. Even without getting to malice, what if it was a simple negligence? A lack of forecast and oversight in the health management of troops, which led to an infectious disease. In that context, blindness could be the consequence of administrative blindness, a lack of attention to the details that had catastrophic consequences. It is easy to judge from our current perspective, but for them, the explanation could have been much more mundane. But what is beyond legend? Samuel consolidated a formidable Bulgarian empire, extending its influence by the Balkans. Think about the magnitude of his reign. Fortified cities, flourishing trade routes, a powerful army, all this left an indelible mark on the region. His political legacy transformed the power structure into the Balkans. Imagine the impact of unifying fragmented territories under a single crown. This not only brought stability, but also promoted the economic and cultural development of the area, creating a Bulgarian Macedonia identity that lasts to this day. The administrative and military reforms implemented by Samuel laid the basis for future states in the region. Its organization system, although adapted to the circumstances of the time, served as a model for later rulers. Think about the influence he had on the political structure of Balkans for centuries after his death. Although his empire finally fell, Samuel's impact on the cultural identity of Balkans is undeniable. His reign left an imprint in the architecture, art, and traditions of the region, elements that we can even appreciate today, mute witnesses of his powerful influence. But what is true in that story of the thousands of blinded soldiers? The truth, as usually happens, is much more complex than the legend. Modern historians point to a significant exaggeration of the number of victims. It is likely that the punishment, although brutal, will not reach the epic scale of the myth. It is believed that Samuel, in his eagerness to maintain control and intimidate his enemies, inflicted severe punishments, but probably a lower number of prisoners. Blindness was a common punishment at the time, a symbol of humiliation and loss of power, but 1,000 soldiers, that is a figure that probably inflated over time. Remember that history is built with oral stories, and legends tend to magnify the facts to generate greater impact. Samuel's legend and blinded soldiers serves as an example of how collective memory can transform and exaggerate historical events, creating myths that endure over the centuries. So, did Samuel really blind thousands of soldiers? The short answer is no, probably not. The medieval chronicles, although fascinating, often exaggerated the facts to create a greater impact. Remember that the information was transmitted orally for a long time before being written, and in that process the details were misrepresented or magnified. Think about it. How could you blind so many soldiers efficiently at that time? There was no technology to do it massively. It is more likely that the number of affected soldiers was much lower, perhaps even only a few who were used as an example to deter others. Another frequent question is, why is this cruel act attributed to Samuel? The answer lies in the need to build a powerful image of the ruler. The kings and emperors often benefited from propaganda, and a story like this, although exaggerated, served to demonstrate their strength and ability to make implacable decisions. In summary, the story of King Samuel and blinded soldiers is a mixture of reality and legend. While some kind of extreme punishment has occurred, the magnitude of the story has been amplified over time. The important thing is to understand the historical context and the function of these stories in the construction of real power. But where do we get all this information? To understand the story of Samuel, we cannot depend only on a source. We have to analyze several medieval chronicles, Byzantine writings, and even some stone inscriptions that have survived the passage of time. It is a historical detective work, where each piece of information, however small, can change our understanding of the facts. One of the key sources is the work of Juan Skylitzes, a Byzantine chronicler of the 11th century. He offers his perspective, of course, from the Byzantine point of view, but his descriptions, although sometimes biased, give us an idea of the time and conflicts between the two empires. Remember that each source has its own biases, and it is your work as a researcher to analyze them critically. /prosody /speak. Speak. Prosody rate equals 90%. In addition to the chronicles, there are modern studies of historians who have dedicated years to analyze these primary sources. His academic works, often published in specialized magazines, offer deeper interpretations and analysis. I recommend looking for work by authors who specialize in the history of medieval Bulgaria. In the video description you will find some examples, so you can start your own research. Remember that history is a continuous process of research and reinterpretation. New archaeological evidence or analysis of existing sources can modify our understanding of the past, so keep learning, continues to investigate, and form your own opinion on the story of Samuel de Bulgaria. And now, a moment to thank you for being here watching this video. Your support is what allows me to continue investigating and creating content about these fascinating forgotten stories. Without your interest, this project simply would not be possible. Thank you for being part of this community that grows day by day, sharing and learning together about the history of Bulgaria. I also want to express my sincere thanks to the sponsors who make possible the production of this video. Its generosity allows you to devote the necessary time to the research, editing, and creation of quality content. Thank you for believing in this project and the importance of preserving history. And of course, a huge thanks to all the collaborators who have participated in this project. From the historians who have helped me with the investigation, to the designers and editors who have given life to this video. Your work, dedication, and passion are the key to this success. Thanks for everything. And speaking of forgotten stories, what do you think if we explore the life of Boris I, the one that unified Bulgaria? His reign was marked by epic battles and crucial decisions that forged the fate of the country. In the next video, I will enter your rise to power and the strategies he used to consolidate his empire. We will see how it unified rival tribes and laid the foundations of the medieval Bulgarian we know. Then, we will immerse ourselves in the mystery of the tombs of Pliska, the old capital. We will discover the palatial intrigues, the hidden secrets after the impressive funeral structures, and the valuable artifacts that reveal the wealth and power of the Bulgarian elite. Prepare for a trip to the past, full of mysteries and fascinating discoveries. And to finish this little sample of what is coming, I tell you a video about Simeon I, the great Tsar that led Bulgaria to his golden age. We will talk about his military victories, his ambition, and his legacy as one of the most important rulers in Bulgarian history. A fascinating character that will leave you breathless. I hope you liked this shocking story. If you liked it, give like and subscribe for more. What do you think about Samuel's punishment? Leave it in the comments. /prosody is /speak.